where we get students from. It spans from Albania and Azerbaijan to Zimbabwe and the West Indies and everything else in between. But over the past year, I think it is important for the community to recognize the past school year, 14-15, we saw 15,200 students arrive to our school system born outside of the U.S. Obviously, a disproportionate percentage of those students were Cuban. During that time, we saw an increased number of students from Honduras, Guatemala, and Nicaragua as well. We're also aware of the fact that via the media, we've been observing the arrival into Central American countries of Cuban refugees. We know that right now there are around 8,000 Cuban-born individuals in Costa Rica. We know that thousands more are throughout Latin America. We also know that the greatest desire of these individuals is to somehow make it to the U.S., and once in the U.S., they want to come to Miami. Recently, there was a deal brokered between Costa Rica and El Salvador providing safe passage to these 8,000 Cuban-born individuals to Mexico. Once in Mexico, they will cross the border. We know that alongside the adults, their children will come. We also know that the best way to prepare for a crisis is perhaps to avoid it. And to avoid a crisis, we must demand federal government involvement in sharing the responsibility, the burden, both financial, in terms of resources, in terms of opportunities for these individuals who will be arriving. The impact on Miami-Dade County Public Schools is rather severe. We get about $7,000 per child in Miami to educate kids. We know that children who are born outside of the country and are recently arrived here present additional challenges. They are, by and large, poor. They do not speak the language. They need to go into intensive programs that are costly. In fact, we have calculated the cost, the additional cost beyond what the state provides us of educating a recently arrived child to be around $2,720. That is a cost absorbed by the local community with no subsidy from the federal government. We also know that the data is rather dramatic. Yes, last year we received 15,200 students during a 12-month period. This year alone, during the first 6 months, we have already enrolled 13,200 students. So in 6 months, 13,200, we honestly expect through the end of the school year to enroll upwards of 20,000 students. The majority of them, or the highest number out of all of the groups and nationalities represented, are coming from Cuba. 3,934 this year have arrived from Cuba. 2,315 this year from Venezuela. But last year alone, over 6,000 from Venezuela. From Honduras this year alone, 773 students. Another 637 from Haiti. Here's what we know. Immigration is a federal responsibility. Immigration is a federal responsibility, and federal inaction that creates a stress point on cities, municipalities, and the school system is not acceptable. So this item seeks funding support from the federal government, specifically from the administration, earmarked through the Department of Education to provide the additional resources that these students require. Why is this an emergency item? Madam Chair and the board members know that the state of Florida counts students twice during the year. One time in October, one time in February. These students are not all going to arrive by February. They will arrive until the very last day of school. Any child who arrives past the head count in February, the state of Florida will not provide us this year with the necessary funding to teach them, creating a financial crunch in our community. It is sad that we are at this again. During the crisis that we anticipated and predicted specific to the migration of Honduran and Guatemalan children from Central America last year, we saw it coming. We saw kids crossing the border, the Mexico border with the U.S. We knew that Miami-Dade represents the highest concentration of Honduran-born individuals, and we knew that at some point those children would reconnect with their communities here. And that happened. At that time, we submitted a like item to the board. And as a result, we saw an investment of $2.36 million 1 year, followed by a $3.2 million investment the following year to address the needs of those students. We are facing a crisis, in my opinion, that is greater than what we experienced earlier. I was speaking with our good mayor from the city of Miami, Mr. Regalado, and we agree that people should not be eluded by the fact that they are not coming a la Mariel style. The fact that they're not coming in full boats, that the visuals don't exist, should not in any way fool anyone. They're coming by the dozens every single day, and the numbers are adding up. The cost is excessive. Last year alone, to teach the 15,200 students that were foreign-born and came to our school system, exceeded $41 million. $41 million. We expect that number to increase this year. The time is now for the federal government to take action. So I want to thank the actions that the congressional delegation, represented by Mr. Carlos Curbelo, Ms. Eliana Ross-Lehtinen, Mr. Mara Diaz-Balart, and Congresswoman Frederica Wilson have already taken on this matter. The chair and I have had conversations with Congressman Curbelo, and I appreciate the consultation that has taken place between Congress and us, and the conversations with the chair that led to this recommendation today. The time is now. There is no time to wait. Kids will be arriving. We are ready to teach them. We are ready to hug them and to love them. For us, this is both a moral and a legal responsibility. When they arrive, regardless of their immigration status, they have a legal right to be taught. But we also believe that that right ought to be accompanied by a federal responsibility to provide the funding and the support that these kids absolutely need. This should not force a crunch, a financial crunch, on our school system. We have seen it time and time again, and the crisis can be avoided if the federal government takes action. So, Madam Chair, thank you very much for the time. Thank you for the conversation over the weekend about this very important matter, and the conversation with Congressman Carlos Curbelo and his ready support. I appreciate you considering this item, and we cannot wait until we deploy our staff members to have aggressive conversations with the administration, with members of Commerce and the Department of Education to secure the needed funding for the kids who have already arrived and those that we know shall be arriving. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. I do have some public speakers before we address this item. I have the Honorable Mayor of the City of Miami, Mr. Tomás Regalado, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Regalado.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, board members, Superintendent. I'm here in support of this item. And the reason that I'm here in support of this item is, number one, because Miami is a municipality with a greater number of public schools in all Miami-Dade County. Number two, because we have seen it before. I remember the earthquake in Haiti, and we went to an elementary school in Little Haiti, and the principal said, we have 75 kids that have shown up in 3 days here. And the superintendent is right. This is not a Mariel boat lift where we're going to have 120,000 people just come in 1 month, but they're coming. Their goal is to come to the city of Miami. And what we have seen, and we saw in June and July of last year, is that we were responsible for taking several groups off the streets in the raw in front of the agencies that do the processing and take them to Camilo's house. Now, our shelters are at full capacity. The city of Miami does outreach for all Miami-Dade County homeless issues because we are contracted with the Homeless Trust, and we have 60 families, regular families, that are being housed in motels because these people lost their job and were evicted from their apartment. So the money is running out unless and until we get federal aid, not for us, but for the agencies that are processing these people that are overwhelmed because of the spike in the number of rafter. There's going to be a crisis. And I think that the superintendent got it right. People cannot say this is not a crisis, and if you don't talk about it, it's not going to happen. It's happening, and it will happen. And this is why I'm in support of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Also, Ms. Alana Collante, a staff member from the office of Congressman Carlos Curbelo, is here with us. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
By the way, let me say that Mr. Curbelo, Congressman Curbelo, indicated to me yesterday. He called me and said he wanted to be here today, but he had an important vote this afternoon, so that's the only reason why he's not here. But thank you very much for being here.
It's my pleasure to represent the Congressman today. I am here in support and to read a letter that Congressman Curbelo has sent you all. Dear Madam Chair and distinguished members of the Miami-Dade County School Board, like you, I am concerned by the surge of Cuban nationals that have entered the United States since the President's December 2014 announcement of normalized diplomatic relations with Castro dictatorship. The Pew Research Center's data says that there has been a 78% spike in Cubans arriving in the United States compared to the same period last year. Furthermore, approximately 8,000 more Cubans are currently making the journey from Costa Rica, while thousands more Cuban nationals are stranded throughout Latin America, and many more others making the perilous sea journey across the Florida Straits. I share your concerns about what this could mean for our community. I have heard from several South Florida mayors about the dwindling resources available to house the influx of Cuban migrants. I have been informed that the City of Miami's housing shelters are at capacity and will struggle to house another wave of inflow of migrants. Nonprofit relief organizations are also feeling the pressure. Catholic charities, church hold services, and international rescue committees do not have the funds necessary to assist these new refugees because they are already overwhelmed by the surge of Cuban nationals that have recently arrived into the United States. I share your frustration in the administration's lack of a federal plan to assist our community. And I commend the board and Superintendent Alberto Carvalho for sounding the alarm on what all this could mean for our schools. I have twice written to President Obama highlighting our challenges. I have attached both letters as well as the response my office received earlier this week from the Department of Homeland Security reiterating the administration's status quo policy. Rest assured that the Miami-Dade congressional delegation is fully aware and engaged on this serious issue. Please keep me apprised as this situation continues to develop and any additional concerns that may surface. My office is here to serve you. Lastly, I would be remiss not to congratulate all of you on your continued and remarkable success. Our community is fortunate to have the best school board and superintendent in the country. I brag about you all the time. Sincerely, Carlos Curbelo.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I am going to be calling on board members to speak. Mr. Gallardo next.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to thank the mayor for coming and for staying because it's been a little long. He's my favorite mayor.
Sure.
And I also want to thank the congressman for his letter and for his support. I think it's so important for us to have a united front on this, because part of the problem has been that different governments have been reaching out to the federal government, like the congressman was saying and like the mayor was saying, and it's being viewed in silos, and one of the great things about this board is that we don't work like that. We have amazing partnerships with our cities and with our delegations, and it really is a team effort. But a few things for the people who are listening to this and wonder, why is the school board interjecting itself in what is seen as a federal issue? Because other governments had said, not my problem, right? It's a federal issue. Let the federal government figure it out. And I think that that is irresponsible. We are interjecting ourselves because, number one, we're at the front line. We are the first ones to be impacted by any and all issues that have to do with immigration. That's why several years ago already, this board took a united position on immigration reform. Before this happened, we were having these conversations, and we talked about the impact that this has, not just on the children who come here from other countries that we have to educate, but on our residents at Miami-Dade County. As the superintendent was explaining, this has a direct impact on the local effort because they come at different times, and we've been dealing with that for a very long time. But this situation, I think, is unique. Last time we talked about this was when the children from Honduras were crossing the border. And I remember we had this same conversation. We were talking about if we were going to receive help or not from the federal government. I want to thank the White House. They gave me the opportunity to visit with some of those children. But that situation was unique in that we weren't sure if those children were going to stay. Those children had to go through a process, and some of them were going to be deported. This situation is dramatically different, and people need to understand that. The children who come, the Cuban children who come with their parents are staying. The Cuban Adjustment Act will provide them, with the ability to stay in Miami-Dade County or whatever part of the United States. And that's it. There is no immigration process. There's no prolonged conversation about, who's going to represent them. Do you need guardian ad litem? What are the other issues that are going to arise as part of that process? This is very clear cut. There are people that are talking about changes to the Cuban Adjustment Act, but the reality is those changes haven't happened. So right now, every child that crosses the Mexican border, it will be a citizen of the United States in a year and a day. And that's something that we have to deal with. So I think that because the situation is different, we can't allow the federal government to say, well, wait for the immigration process. There's no process here. Cuban nationals have a privileged status in terms of immigration. So every single one that comes, the question is, where are they going to stay? We know that there's certain cities that are going to be impacted more than others. The city of Miami, we also know the city of Hialeah. The superintendent mentioned some of the cities that have been impacted in the past when there is an influx. And we just want to make sure that our students and our schools are prepared. The last point that I want to make is in the past, when we dealt with this, the federal government allowed us to participate in the intake. We don't have that ability. They didn't allow us to do it when the children crossed the Mexican border. And I haven't heard anybody talking about that now. But once upon a time, when we had many children come, they gave us the opportunity to provide those children with information as to what is their best placement. Currently, what is happening is they just show up at a school. And we just deal with it. And that's part of the concern. What school are they going to show up at, and how are we going to deal with it? Because we have to take them, as the superintendent mentioned, that very day. And we have other obligations in terms of class size, obligations in terms of ESOL, obligations in terms of disability and special needs and accommodations. And all those things start to trigger, and they take a certain amount of time. So for the people listening at home that are wondering, why are we asking for information, specifically for the Cubans that are in Costa Rica that have been in those shelters, that information exists. That information exists, and I think that we should have it as soon as possible so that we can prepare ourselves and ensure that this is not a burden on our residents. So why we're engaging? Because we're at the front line, and I want to thank the superintendent and the board for their leadership on this, and thank our partners at the City of Miami and the other cities for supporting us in this united effort for some clarity and some support from the federal government. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Regalado. Dr. Perez, ma'am?
I would like to thank the superintendent for being so responsible always, and being at the forefront and looking ahead, and Ms. Hatman for her participation, and the mayor, Regalado, for being here, and the congressmen. I'd just like to mention that if we look at 20,000 students, that is a sizable amount of students that we would have to will have to accommodate. If we look at the capacity, just looking at capacity, the capital end of it, schools with 500 students, that would mean that we will need to build 40 schools to accommodate 20,000 students. And an average or inexpensive school, notwithstanding the land and the price of land, would cost us about $10 million. That means that in capital dollars alone, we would need $500 million, $400 to $500 million, and that excludes thinking about finding teachers, quality teachers, and support staff. So it is an uphill battle, and we do absolutely need all the support that we can get, and this has to be brought to the forefront of the people, the decision makers in the federal government, to help us with the funding. I know that we are always willing to open our doors, but this is a sizable amount of money, and as the mayor and the superintendent have said, they're trickling in. It isn't a Marielle where we have to do this from one day to the next, but eventually they are here, and they are our responsibility. So thank you, and I hope that our voices, our joint voices, as Ms. Regalado has said, are heard and acted upon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Perez. Ms. Navarro?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too want to echo the sentiments of my board members. I want to thank our superintendent and our board chair for bringing this item as a good cause item. As most of us, we've been hearing the conversations on TV and on the radio, and I have to thank Mayor Regalado, because I do listen to radio every day, and making sure that this conversation stayed out in the community. It is timely. We know they're en route. I can tell you that as a child of the Mariel, I too was in that exodus. Our communities, we shouldn't be having these conversations every so often when there's an influx of immigrants. We are a community of immigrants. Our school system deserves to ensure that we have the funding available to receive these children and families beyond also our public school system. And it is through the leadership of our federal delegation, and I have to thank my congressman, Congressman Curbelo, and the entire delegation for their leadership in this. Today it is the conversation about the Cuban influx. Tomorrow we could have a Haitian influx. We could have a Colombian influx. We shouldn't be begging the federal government for money to support these services that we need. And like the superintendent said, this is timely because we are in the middle of the legislative session. We count our FTEs now in February. We missed that opportunity, and then we have to deal with the situation in terms of finding the funding to provide these services to our students. So I want to thank the superintendent and our school board chair for bringing this item. I think we have to be ready, and they are trickling in, they are coming, they are en route, and we have to be ready. We shouldn't have to be begging the federal government every time we have this. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else would like to say? Dr. Karp, sir?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just more of a question. I do want to thank you and the superintendent and our congressional delegation for acting so quickly. I guess the question is now that when the item is approved and we move forward and we join forces, what's the type of timeline we can look at, given that this is something right here coming at us? Just looking back, I guess, in previous experiences, what can we hope to expect?
To the chair. Good question, Dr. Karp. That's why I mentioned that during the 14-15 school year, when we were actually during the previous summer, when we were observing the influx primarily of Honduran, Guatemalan, Nicaraguan children into our community, we made a prediction that those numbers were going to grow dramatically. Why? Because we saw in the first quarter the arrival of 300 students from Honduras, while the previous year only 12 had arrived during that same time period. So we brought a similar item to the board, and I do believe that it was through the efforts of this board, alongside the Council of Great City Schools and other cities across America that were similarly impacted, that the federal government reacted to and provided a special Title III allocation specific for newly arrived students. The previous year we had received nothing. So in 13-14, in 14-15, as I said, still within that fiscal year, we were able to receive, if memory serves me right, $2.3 million, and then the following year, $3.2 million. So the federal government is in a process of going through their budget requests right now. Now is the time. If we see a repetition of what took place in 14-15, it is possible that within 5 to 6 months, we may see a specific earmark and allocation to address the issue we're debating today.
Dr. Karp, sir?
Thank you very much. And while we wait for that earmark and hopefully get it, where does the money come from to absorb some of these costs? Where do we specifically take the money from?
So that is the crunch that I described earlier. Is that until there is federal relief through increased funding or recognition of the FTE that's here or will be arriving in the following year, there will be a cash shortfall. There will be the financial crisis caused by that. And sadly, and I want to be perfectly honest, the immediate consequences could be certainly a depleting of supply dollars, could be increased class sizes in targeted schools because we do not designate where kids are going to be living. So we've seen, I looked at data today, Hialeah High, HML, Westland, a significant increase recently in number of students. So there are pockets, and we may see a strain in terms of resources, also class sizes in those schools. But look, we have a contingency plan to deal with this. We have a contingency plan to deal with the death of Castro or a regime change in Cuba that may certainly prompt thousands of additional students coming in. And that involves not only collaboration with the federal government, but also us rapidly opening additional assessment centers, which we have a great deal of history, to appropriately place kids in the right programs and the right grade level. Through Ms. Brown's work in operations, we've spent time identifying schools where there is capacity, even perhaps reopening schools that we have decommissioned temporarily to house students should we need. But Dr. Perez, and I have not made a calculation, made a good point. If this is a sustainable or sustained phenomenon or trend for the long haul, we may be put in a position where it's just not an operational financial crisis. It may, in fact, become also a capital crisis. So that's what we're looking at, Dr. Karp. And the short answer to your question is, sadly, absent an aggressive emergency federal investment, we really face a financial crunch which will be felt in terms of class sizes and resource depletion.
And Madam
Thank
Chair,
you.
my final question,
Yes,
if I
of
may.
course, sir.
So this is really been a federal conversation. So if there is an impact to class sizes, now that becomes a state conversation because, of course, there's penalties that come our way if we don't meet specific requirements. So at what point do we have the conversation, or I guess at some point we need to have a conversation with people at the state if this is going to be the impact to us?
Through the chair, absolutely right, Dr. Karp, and I'm glad the mayor is here because we did not wait. Sunday morning, we probably had a 15-minute conversation with the governor about this issue, and we put it on the governor's radar that this issue was having a significant impact, not only in terms of municipal services, but as far as the school system is concerned. As Ms. Regalado said, we are the first line of defense. We're going to feel it first. And the governor is aware. The governor committed to supporting us in our efforts. And obviously through our advocacy efforts, guided or led by Ms. Iraida Mendes Cartaya, as well as the board's own advocacy efforts. This needs to become one of our top priorities. You cannot have both, right? You cannot have a maintenance of everything as it was prior to the arrival of 13,000 students, right, with a promise of more coming in, with inflexible funding levels and expect everything to remain the same. So you're absolutely right. Yes, our direction, our efforts are primarily addressed at the federal level, but there is work to do in terms of policy implications at the state level, and we began that conversation Sunday morning with the governor.
Thank you. You finished, sir? Dr. Feldman, sir?
Thank you very much, Madam. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank all the board members and you, Mr. Superintendent, for the conversation. 2 parts, if I could. You had mentioned earlier about the Council of Great City Schools. Is there an opportunity that you'll have in order to meet with other superintendents around the Council of Great City Schools to see if they will join us in putting forth another item as they did before?
Through the chair, absolutely. So immediately following the expected approval of this resolution, it is our intent to initiate aggressive conversations and letters, not only to members of Congress, to the administration, but also to support organizations. And the preeminent support organization of our school system and other large school systems is the council. We know we're not unique. So Los Angeles is feeling the impact. A number of cities in Texas are feeling the impact. But we know that we are unique because we are, so to speak, the border city to Cuba. And whether they are crossing by raft, by boat, or making a lengthy trek across through Central America and through Mexico to get here, they're going to come here. So yes, we will spare no effort in utilizing the muscle, the power of the council to secure the support we need.
Great, thank you. And follow up, it'd be helpful if we could have a talking point sheet of all the things that you've enumerated this morning, this afternoon, so that when we do speak to people that we're influential with, be it Congress or the legislature, we'll be able to speak with one voice with all of the same information. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir. Anything else?
Only,
Dr. Perez, yes?
yes, thank you. I believe that whereas other cities are impacted, we're the most. Because many arrive, and not only do they have family members here, but after they arrive, they hope to travel back to see the people, to visit Cuba back, and so this is a much more attractive place for them to be able to do that. So I do think that we will be the most impacted.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Perez. I think all board members have spoken, and I totally agree with the last comment of Dr. Perez that we would be mostly the more impacted school district, I believe. It seems that because Miami-Dade County is such a wonderful, vibrant community, we always seem to get the biggest amount of students and families to live here. That's why, besides the Mayor Regalado that so kindly was here with us today in support of this item, We also understand and we know that Mayor Carlos Hernandez from the city of Hialeah, as well as Mayor Luigi Boria from the city of Doral, have expressed the same concerns. So I certainly welcome and thank the mayors for joining in what I think it's a very proactive method or a very proactive item that we will be doing, and we should not wait until the situation gets really a crisis. I think this is the moment, and that's why the superintendent and I, when we spoke this weekend, as well as the Congressman Curbelo, that spoke about it, and the letter that we have from the all our congressional delegation of the month of January. This is the time to bring it to the board, and that's why after our discussion this weekend, I decided to bring a good cause item. As many board members have indicated, we all know that our community has a rich history on welcoming immigrants and refugees from South and Central America and the Caribbean Basin. We've done that. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that when there's a pending crisis, we need to address it before it becomes a real big problem. As it's been said by the superintendent and by the other board members, there is a big cost, however, associated with welcoming all the refugees that will come to our shores or to our cities or to our county, including the provision of education and a number of other social services that go above and beyond what our community resources can support. We know that in the case of the school system, there is a significant cost to provide an adequate education to newly arrived immigrants. That cost is well above what the state provides in terms of funding. The cost to provide housing, job services, and health services is costly and should not be borne by the local taxpayer. That's something that I feel very strongly about, particularly when immigration policy is very, very clear to me that it's a federal responsibility. This board has called on the federal government in years past to provide additional resources to support the education of foreign-born students as recently as June of 2014. We all know, we read, we hear on the radio and on television that there's an impending influx of Cuban refugees to the United States that will come via the Mexican border. We know that we must be prepared. We must be prepared to address this item. The members of the congressional delegation, Mr. Carlos Curbelo, Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, and Congressman Diaz-Balart, as we all has been mentioned, they sent a letter to the White House on January 7th asking for a proactive plan to be put in place that would provide additional resources. And I believe it is extremely appropriate and necessary for this district and this board to join our voices, along with those our delegation, mayors, and other community agencies in calling on the federal government to deliver the resources that are necessary to address the needs of these people who will arrive here for a better life and who will no doubt become valuable contributors to the vibrant culture of Miami-Dade County. Thank you very much. Thank you. If there are no other comments for board members, I need a vote on A2.